Today, I'm talking about the book Fantastic Mr. Fox, which was written by Roald Dahl in 1970 and adapted for the big screen by Wes Anderson in 2009. It's about a sly fox who takes on 3 farmers and comes out ahead. Hey there, I'm Jessica, and this is Bookshelf to Big Screen. If you're new to the channel, I take a look at books that have been adapted to the big or small screen and compare the differences between the two. So if you're the kind of person who loves to know what changes were made in the movie, or if the book really was better, be sure to subscribe. Roald Dahl has written many children's books that have been adapted for the big screen, but Fantastic Mr. Fox is one of my favorites because I absolutely love Wes Anderson and the way he brings stories to life on screen. Wes Anderson took this story and added layers of interpersonal and family drama along with several other signature elements usually seen in his films. So let's get into it. The movie starts with a younger Mr. and Mrs. Fox. Together, they steal a couple of squabs, but Mr. Fox gets them caught. Mrs. Fox tells him that she's pregnant, and if they survive, she wants him to find a new line of work. 12 Fox years pass, and Mr. Fox is a writer now. They also have a son named Ash. Mrs. Fox says her nephew, Christopherson, is coming to stay with them. Mr. Fox says he's tired of being poor and doesn't want to live in a hole anymore. This is all new to the movie. There's no backstory where Mrs. Fox makes him stop stealing birds, and she's actually a very supportive wife in the book. Another difference here is that the Foxes actually have 4 children, and there's no side story about a cousin. In the movie, while looking at a treehouse, Mr. Fox sees 3 farms and gets an idea. He goes to see his lawyer, Badger, who says buying the treehouse is a bad idea because it's too dangerous to live near these farmers. He tells Fox about each farmer. Bogus, the chicken farmer, weighs as much as a young rhinoceros and eats 3 chickens for each meal every day. Bunce, the duck and goose farmer, is the size of a dwarf and eats homemade donuts injected with goose livers. Bean, the turkey and apple farmer, is skinny as a pencil, smart as a whip, and possibly the scariest man alive, and he lives on a liquid diet of his own alcoholic apple cider. In the book, the foxes live in a hole under the tree on top of a hill, but Mr. Fox never dreams of moving out of the hole and into the tree. The book never really talks about any of the animals having professions either, so I think it's funny that Badger is a lawyer, but it does give the movie a way to describe things like the farmers without having a narrator. The description of the farmers is spot on, and I really like that Badger just happens to have a recording of the local children singing the song about Bogus, Bunce, and Bean, which is straight from the book. In the movie, Fox ignores Badger's advice and buys the house anyway. Christopherson arrives, and he's more of a natural athlete than Ash. This causes some tension because Ash longs to be a great athlete like his dad. On top of this, the girl Ash has a crush on starts going steady with Christopherson. There are also several references throughout the film of Ash being different and getting bullied for it. This is all unique to the film, and I think these elements of unrequited love and not fitting in are pretty quintessential Wes Anderson elements. In the movie, Mr. Fox recruits Kylie to help him steal from the farmers. They start with Bogus's farm and steal a few chickens. On the second night, they hit Bunce's storehouse, and now Miss Fox is getting suspicious. On the third night, Mr. Fox lies to Mrs. Fox about having to cover a book party, but heads to Bean's cider cellar instead. Ash tries to go and help, but Mr. Fox tells him he's too small and uncoordinated and sends him home. A few minutes later, Christopherson shows up because Mr. Fox actually recruited him to come along. In the cellar, they encounter Rat, who works as Bean's security in the cellar. Rat talks trash about Mrs. Fox, saying that she was the town tart back in the day, but before they can fight, Mrs. Bean comes down into the cellar. Christopherson knocks Rat into a bin and they all hide. Mrs. Bean calls up to Mr. Bean asking how many bottles to get, grabs a couple of bottles, and leaves, allowing them to get away. In the book, Mr. Fox steals from these farmers regularly and asks his wife each night what she wants for dinner before he goes out, so she never really has a problem with his line of work. The farmers are onto him, and each night they try to catch him, but he's always been too clever. I really like the bit in the movie about Mrs. Fox's so-called wild past. Wes Anderson creates these incredibly strong female characters, and Mrs. Fox is definitely one of them. I love that he takes a moment here to try and squash the double standard and say, yeah, she had fun, we all did, so what? One thing that bothers me about this scene, though, is how big Rat is. He's like a head taller than Fox for some reason. Is this like Princess Bride rodents of unusual size or something? I don't know, but it bugs me. However, I do enjoy Willem Dafoe in all of his roles, and this is no exception. In the book, we don't see Rat until Mr. Fox goes back into the cellar after the farmers attack. He's a regular-sized rat, and as soon as Fox threatens to eat him, he stops making a fuss about them being in there. Finally, it's actually Bean's maid that comes down into the cellar to get the cider, and she's yelling up to Mrs. Bean about how many bottles she should get. In the movie, the farmers have an emergency meeting and decide they need to kill Mr. Fox. Bean says he's figured out where Mr. Fox lives and they're going to wait for him to come out and shoot him. Mr. Fox hears and smells them and manages to get back into his house, but the farmers shoot off his tail. Mrs. Fox patches him up and they go to bed, but the farmers start digging, so the foxes and Kylie have to dig deeper to avoid being caught. Then the farmers rent some tractors to keep digging after them, and soon they've completely destroyed the hill the foxes used to live on. Bean is shown on the news wearing Mr. Fox's tail as a necktie. In the book, when the farmers are first waiting outside the hole, they intentionally hide downwind so Mr. Fox can't smell them at all. He initially hears them, but passes it off for a field mouse. Once he's all the way out, he catches a glint of moonlight on the barrel of a shotgun, and that's when he runs back inside. The digging part is all pretty accurate, but Mr. Fox's tail is never used as a necktie. When the maid is in the cellar calling up to Mrs. Bean, she's sad to hear the tail was destroyed because Bean had promised it to her as a souvenir. In the movie, the farmers call all their employees to wait around the hole with guns at the ready and plan to starve the foxes out. After 3 days, Badger and a few other animals find the foxes. Badger is mad at Fox, saying there's no way out and the wives and children are at the bottom of the flint mine, starving, and it's all his fault. Mr. Fox has an idea and sends Mrs. Fox to the flint mine to tell the others that help is on the way. Mr. Fox leads the rest of the animals directly into each of the 3 farms, which they clean out. They take everything back to the flint mine for a big feast. In the book, Mr. Fox comes up with his plan before they come across Badger. He and his kids go to Boggis's farm. They drink some water and then take 3 hens. Mr. Fox sends one kid back to Mrs. Fox with the hens so that she can start cooking them. The rest of them head to Bunce's, but they run into Badger and his son on the way. Mr. Fox sends Badger's son back to Mrs. Badger to invite her and all the other animals to the feast that Mrs. Fox is preparing. Inside Bunce's warehouse, Mr. Fox warns them that they can't overdo it and let the farmers know what they've been up to. They fill up 2 push carts with duck, geese, ham, and bacon, plus some carrots for the rabbits. Fox sends another 2 of his kids with the carts back to Mrs. Fox, reminding them to tell her to expect all the other animals. And the rest of them move on to Bean's farm. So in the cider cellar, it's Mr. Fox, one of his sons, and Badger, and this is the part in the book where they confront Rat and almost get caught by the maid that kind of mirrors the scene from earlier in the movie. In the movie, when they're about to eat, Badger tries to make a toast, but Mr. Fox cuts him off and starts giving a long speech. Meanwhile, Bean is furious when he finds out that they've been cleaned out and has an idea to flood them out. The cider flood interrupts Mr. Fox's speech and washes all the animals into the sewer. In the book, by the time they get back with the cider, all the other animals had already started eating because they were also hungry. Badger makes a toast to Mr. Fox for saving their lives. Mrs. Fox stands up and announces that her husband is a fantastic fox. Finally, Mr. Fox stands up to give his speech. He says that they never have to go outside again because they can easily just take what they need to live from the farmers without them knowing. In the end, the animals live happily ever after while the farmers sit waiting outside the foxhole for the rest of their lives. There's still about a third of the movie left after the feast, so all of that is in addition to what's in the book. There's some fun stuff, including a kind of war between the animals and humans. Also, Mr. Fox rides a motorcycle, and there's a majestic wolf. In the end, the farmers sit waiting around a manhole in the street because the animals stayed living in the sewer. Mr. Fox has discovered that they can live off food from the supermarket, and this is the moment that Mrs. Fox tells him he really is a kind of quote-unquote fantastic fox. And, of course, they live happily ever after. There's so much to love about this adaptation. It builds a lot of dramatic themes on top of a pretty lighthearted short story. Again, I'm a huge fan of Wes Anderson, and I loved how he brought so many elements of his signature filmmaking style into his first animated movie. In 2017, I was living in Abu Dhabi, and my son and I had the opportunity to attend a special screening of the French animated film My Life as a Zucchini. What was really cool about this was that afterwards, one of the film's animators, Elie Chapuis, was there to talk about what went into making the movie and the animation process. I'm bringing this up because Elie Chapuis was one of the animators for Fantastic Mr. Fox, and at that time he was already working on Wes Anderson's next animated film, Isle of Dogs. He took a lot of time answering everyone's questions and giving insight into the entire animation process, and it really gave me such a greater appreciation for these kind of films. So if you haven't seen it, it's a great adaptation. It's a great film to watch with your kids, or even if you don't have kids. Well, there you have it. That's my recap on Fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl and the 2009 movie adaptation. I've included links to both the book and the movie in the description below, so you can check them out for yourselves. If you enjoyed this review, please click like, and be sure to click subscribe to see my next video. Thanks for watching.